So I have a lot of students who come to me and they want to know what, they want to do therapy. But they tell me they want to, I've had people that say they want to be a psychiatrist. I'm like, are you sure? Because you have to go to medical school first and then like have several, you have a residency and then a specialization. So are you sure you want to be a psychiatrist? Because if you want to help people through counseling, you're not going to be a psychiatrist. If you want to prescribe meds and make lots of money, having very few interactions with people, you become a psychiatrist, right? If you want to be is that fair?
No, this is a very fair summary.
If you want to help people via counseling or therapy, and I'm going to use those two words interchangeably, counseling and therapy. I know there's some nuances for our purposes today. I'm going to put them in the same category. You have some different options, and I didn't realize this. So when I decided I wanted to do therapy, I just picked whatever someone else was doing, and I just kind of went and did it. I was in a family studies program, so I just did marriage family therapy. But at the clinic I work right now, we have, so if I draw this circle here, this represents mental health counseling, mental health therapy. That's mental health counseling, okay? There are many paths to get to do this. So when some of you raise your hand and said you want to be a therapist, you want to do counseling, realize there's not only one path to get there. There's many paths to get there. So I'm going to describe those because I think if you understand your options, you'll be more inclined to make a good decision. So, and I'll put them in order of the pecking order, because there's a pecking order in our field that that some people feel they're superior, but sometimes insurance companies pay more for different things, and I'll explain that. So down here, we'll say we have your clinical psychologist, okay? Over here, you've got your clinical social work. Then you've got your marriage and family therapy, and I'll move here in just a second. And then you've got your LPC, or your licensed professional counselor, okay? Where I work here in town and do therapy, we have all of these people here, and we're all doing the same thing. So if you were to examine our day-to-day life, we're all doing the same thing. We're all doing therapy. We're all seeing different types of clients. With a couple of exceptions. There is certain testing that you can get good money for if you could perform that testing, that you're only going to be able to perform if you're a clinical psychologist. Okay?
And I will also add that not only do they have that specific training in that testing, but a lot of our legal systems rely on a judge. If they order a psychological testing, they'll order it of a clinical psychologist. And so it really does have some teeth in that testing area.
And because it has that teeth, if you are a clinical psychologist, any one of these people, a lot of your money, unless you are living in a very large area where there's lots of people who have lots of money who are willing to pay you out of pocket, most of your income as a therapist will come through insurance reimbursement. And insurance is reimbursed at different rates based on credential. Okay? You're going to have very similar reimbursement rates for these groups of people right here, with maybe some nuances. Typically, there's going to be an uptick. You'll make a little bit more going the clinical psych route. Okay? So just as an FYI. So you might ask, well, if it's all about money, why wouldn't you go clinical psych? For me, I would not enjoy being a clinical psychologist because of the nature of their work. They work primarily with individuals. Now, they might get additional training in working with couples and families, but that's not built into a clinical psych program in general. You learn a lot on working with very severe mental health, schizophrenia. That's the one that came to mind. More, right? They work a lot with individuals, okay? However, some people erroneously believe that only these people can actually work with people who suffer from depression and anxiety, okay? Any one of these people have lots of experience, if they've gone through a graduate program and are practicing therapy, working with people with depression and anxiety. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go any route here. So then the question comes up, well, why should I pick one or the other? So let me just give you some background about why you do it, because a lot of it's going to be in the training. So the training is going to be nuanced in here. So clinical psych, as I mentioned, they're kind of their whole focus, their background is kind of on the individual, the psychology of an individual, which is important because individuals make up marriages and individuals make up families. So this is an important component. You're going to get less of a relationship focus there, but you'll learn a lot about the individual. Social work, as far as I know, social work is a great degree. If you're not sure if you want to do therapy, if you think you might want to do therapy but you're not sure, social work's a great degree because they don't make you do a lot of therapy in grad school. Am I right with this? You don't have to. Their job is they're going to expose you to a lot of other jobs aside from therapy. But by doing that, they're also not going to give you as much therapy or counseling experience as you might get in another program.
To kind of go off what you were saying about clinical social workers, is it just like if they do want to do therapy, it's after they get their master's, then they go on to get clinical hours and continue with that?
It's a great question. So I just had a former student in my office about a year ago. He did a social work degree here at BYU-Idaho, then he went to get a social work degree at Boise State, I believe. I think it was Boise State. And I asked him, so how's therapy going? And this was a surprise to me. He's like, oh, it's great. And he told me about it. Well, how many clients have you seen? Well, I've just had one from my program. I've just had one client from my program. I'm like, oh, that's it? Oh, yeah, we just kind of follow this one client through our program or through this situation. And that was his situation, right? And I say that because he wasn't mandated to do more. Now, if he wants to become an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, he's going to have to get a certain number of therapy hours before he becomes a licensed clinical social worker. So a lot of that work is going to come maybe post-grad in a clinic where you're being supervised. Okay? And I'll come back to the hours in a second. But they do it. Social work, the framework of social work does a great job of connecting individuals with resources in the community. Okay? Moving over here to, and FYI, I don't know a lot about the kind of the theoretical background of the professional counseling.
I put up the credentials of the degrees because typically speaking, if you're going to go into counseling psychology and become a counselor and become a licensed professional counselor, those are PhD level counseling positions. They don't have a master's in that. You go directly from a bachelor's to a PhD. Typically speaking.
Yeah.
There's some variations.
There are some. So for example, for those of you local to Rexburg, Idaho State, actually the state of Idaho doesn't really have a marriage and family therapy program.
They have a counseling.
Yeah. They have a counseling program, a master's program, and you can do therapy with a master's degree. You can become an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, at a master's level through going to ISU.
And some of our students have done that. One of my former students graduated. She just recently contacted me. She has her master's now. She's a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Idaho. She wants to do some teaching now. It's kind of exciting. So
the question is this. So this is where, I mean, a lot of people who join marriage family studies, they have a kind of a slight, they kind of geared towards family stuff. So let me just tell you why I chose this route in hindsight. I chose it because I thought it was the only option I had. In hindsight, this is why I would have chosen it still. My passion was working with couples. That's what I've wanted to do. That's what I do now. This program will provide better training in working with couples and families than any of the other ones. And you're like, well, how can you say that? Well, let me explain. There's a certain number of clinical hours that you have to obtain before you graduate from a graduate program. So and I think this is actually superior than any other, I'm not sure about clinical psych, but right here, you have to have 500 face-to-face hours, meaning 500 hours in the room with clients, okay? Half of those hours have to be what we call relational hours, or with couples or families. So you actually have to have, before you graduate, experience working with couples and families before they'll give you a marriage and family therapy degree. That is not required for these other professions. So you might understand the danger then in going to somebody for couples therapy right here or here or here if they don't have the background. Now some clinical psychologists, social workers, and LPCs, they're great at working with couples and families because they've gone above and beyond their degree to get additional training. So, and I say this because some of you might be in a geographical location where marriage and family isn't an option because there's just not a program and you've got to stay local somewhere. I bring this up because if you want to work with couples and families, just get into the field. Go one of these other routes, like just jump over here and take this path, but be very intentional during this program to get all the experience with couples and families you can, number one. And number two, when you go to like a placement, like an internship, when you're trying to get your clinical hours, find a marriage and family therapist to work with or to supervise you, somebody who has that experience.
I've looked at some grad schools that do like a dual licensure between like the MFT and the LPC.
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to that? Is it just giving me training in marriage and family as well as individuals, or is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's counseling goes into like school counseling. So there's like the clinical counseling in a therapy room. There's school counseling. So it'll provide some broader view of counseling in general. So I don't know that there's a pro or con. I think if it's available, then sure. So, other questions on pathways to mental health counseling?
What if you particularly want to work mostly with youth?
Youth, okay. So then it kind of comes back to how do you feel we best help youth? So I know this is just my slide. I'm a marriage family therapist. That's my bias, and I'll explain why. Okay. When you take a child out of a system, like a family system, you know, my brothers used to work at these different youth homes down in Utah. And the rich people from California would send their children to Utah to have, I'm quoting them, the Mormons fix their children, right? The problem is if you take a child out of the system, send them to a place to get help, and then put them back in a broken system, there's a good chance that children or adolescents are going to go right back to those old patterns. And so in most cases, if you really want to help a child, it's going to be through a family lens. Because the best ally you should have in the home is somebody who lives with them, like a parent.
And that includes young adults, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Or the teenagers.
Yes, and so children. So my slide is, I think family therapy is great for that because I like to think that's how I'm going to help somebody the best. However, all of these people are going to get trained in working with individuals, young and small. Young and small, young and old. Young, small, old, small, all of it, okay? So all of these will receive training in that. For those of you who are marriage family studies, the benefit for you is that you've already got a lot of family background because of the degree here, that if you decided to go one of these other routes, you're not going to go in blind assuming that the family is not a big deal. You understand now how much family impacts individuals.
I'll just add that both with the social work and the family studies bachelor's degrees, you can go and do a lot of case management in agencies and not do therapy, not need to do therapy, and those are pretty good starting jobs to get yourself exposed into the field. And then if you do want to go on, great. Your internships that are required of our major are a great way to get exposure to that and those experiences, and can prepare you for graduate school as well. But boy, if you've had a really meaningful internship, you might take that experience and go, you know what, I loved this. This is what I want to do as a profession. Well, go on and get your graduate degree then and go do that. Because that can be a great stepping stone then to putting a whole career path for you in that area.
I often get questions about online programs. What's your take on online programs? To be totally honest, my in-the-classroom experience in graduate school was not phenomenal compared to what you guys are getting here, in my opinion. I think the learning model is very powerful. So honestly, the most powerful experience I got in my graduate program was doing therapy and having a supervisor. That was the most powerful experience. Even if you take an online program, you're going to have to go do therapy, and somebody's going to have to supervise you. So I think I'm opposed to an online program. I don't think that necessarily lesser programs are typically more expensive. But if that's your only option, I think it's an option to consider, because where the rubber meets the road is going to be in the clinic, which even if you're in an online program, you have to do that.
If you had to choose between online and classroom though.
I personally liked, I don't know how people sit in front of the computer that long, so
and it gives me headaches.
Yeah, so for me that's fine. It also, like, the clinic I did therapy at as a part of my graduate program was fantastic. Like the technology, the one-way mirrors. So the supervision experience I got was very powerful because of that. Okay. It might be that through an online program where you're going to do therapy, you might not have some of that technology, and so maybe some of your supervision is going to be less hands-on.
Another thing to keep in mind is with any program, any route you decide to go, just make sure that they are accredited. They're an accredited program. it really will lend itself very nicely when you do want to go get your licensure, whatever state you're going to be in. The accreditation process really helps speed that up. AMFT is our national organization for marriage and family therapy, and they list all of the accredited MFT programs, both at the master's and PhD level, on their website. So it might be worth checking that out. Social work has something very similar, and so does counseling as well.
So just to summarize, all of these paths can get you to a place where you're doing therapy. The backgrounds, the training is going to be a little bit different, but sometimes you take what's given to you, and if your geographical location lends itself better to this than this or this, to me, you can break into the field. You still have to have continuing education, so you can still learn and grow. So I get a lot of questions about what is it like to be a therapist and how to manage that. And it can be really hard. It can be really hard. There are two truths that have helped me and helped me leave work at work. Number one, for some reason, God created this plan with agency, and it's important enough for him to honor it under any circumstance that I have to trust in that plan. So at the end of the day, if I have a client who's suicidal, if that client chooses to take their life, and I've done all that I could to prevent, at the end of the day, that's not my fault. At the end of the day, if I'm working with a couple to try to help them save their marriage, if at the end of the day they decide to just end their marriage, that's not my fault. That's their decision they're making. So I remind myself of that truth, number one. Number two, God loves them more than I do. If I love them. Sometimes I love them, right? Sometimes you love people more than others. But God cares, and you are not the only tool that he's going to use to help them. You are one of many assets that he's going to use to try to benefit their life. So those two truths for me have just helped in balancing that. So, any questions? Last questions on therapy? Yeah.
Well, I've heard with therapy, with what you just mentioned about compassion fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that were to be an occurrence as a person goes through their program and becomes a therapist, how they would handle that.
You leave your program, you realize, oh, geez, I am so tired of helping people. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Honestly, I think if you go to the licensed professional counselor, there's probably other things you could do. Maybe go work in a high school, being a school counselor. Maybe there's other options. If you go social work, there's other opportunities. Clinical psych, I have no idea. MFT, there's a lot of options if you think outside of the box. One example. A professor I had in the grad school, her and her husband were both marriage family therapists. But he got done with the program, was like, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. So she's teaching it, and he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So he started his own company. He consults businesses. He calls it systems consulting because he's an expert in how systems work. And we apply that to family systems. But my friends, systems are systems. If you know how to work a system and work within a system, it's a huge asset. And you have to understand, the skills you'll develop as a therapist, similar to the skills you've already developed now, sometimes we just assume that everyone can do this. But go to the engineering building. Go to some CIT stuff. And no offense, but there are certain skills that you have that are not just everyone just has. And people actually they need those skills from an employer's perspective. So that's one idea. Another idea is there's teaching opportunities. If you wanted to jump ship and not do therapy and teach instead, there are opportunities. So it's a good question.